Is not agreed to. Are there further amendments?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Cruz?
I'd like to make two comments. Number one, there's an old saying that those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Unfortunately, it does not appear this committee has learned from that saying. Across the country, there are advocates of criminal justice reform who are watching what's happening here today. And they may well celebrate in a few minutes when your bill is getting ready to pass out of committee. But unfortunately, we're repeating exactly the same pattern this committee has done before. In a prior Congress, I introduced a series of amendments on a prior iteration of First Step to eliminate retroactivity and to exclude violent crimes. And the same thing happened then that happened here today, which is the committee voted it down. Then, as now, there was a majority on the Judiciary Committee to vote down every one of those amendments. You get all the Democrats and a couple of Republicans, that's enough to vote them down. And what I predicted then, in this room, I said, well, you can vote it out of committee, but what you've just done is killed this bill. There's some members of this committee that are relatively new to the Senate. This bill will be voted out, and the chances that it passes on the floor of the Senate right now, having rejected all three of those amendments, I can quantify with exact precision. The chances that this bill passes into law are 0.0%. And most of the members of the committee know that. Certainly the senior members who've been around here for a while know it's not going to get the votes to pass on the floor. So it may feel good as a partisan exercise to vote down all the amendments, but for the advocates of criminal justice reform at home, what you've just seen is the process failing because the bill won't pass. And both sides know that. Let me make a second point. We are in polarized times. We're in angry times. Each side yells and screams at each other. There's too much hate on both sides of the aisle. We're convinced the other side is always in the wrong. I hope that that fever breaks in time. Donald Trump was a unique president. Unique in good respects and unique in some respects that were not so good. One of the consequences of Donald Trump is that he drove our Democratic colleagues stark raving mad. And we are living in a world where congressional Democrats have been radicalized by 4 years of Donald Trump. There used to be such a creature as moderate Democrats. I'm not convinced there is such a thing anymore. In the last 5 months of the Biden administration, with Schumer and Pelosi leading Congress, Senate Democrats have 3 times had votes to determine where they are on the question of violent criminals, on the question of the very worst violent criminals, murderers, rapists, child molesters. And the only reasonable conclusion an objective observer can derive from what we've seen the last 5 months is Senate Democrats have made the decision that they are the party that supports violent criminals. Why do I say that? Because on the floor, when I introduced an amendment to say we should not send stimulus checks, $1,400 checks from the taxpayers to criminals currently incarcerated, to murderers, to rapists and child molesters, every single Democrat voted no. It failed by 1 vote. That means every Democrat was the deciding vote, and the federal government sent millions of dollars to criminals currently incarcerated, many for horrific crimes. Likewise, in the Rules Committee, I had a series of amendments to strike from S1, what many are calling the Corrupt Politicians Act, the provisions to mandate that criminals and felons be allowed to vote, and in particular focused on murderers, rapists, and child molesters. And once again, you saw Senate Democrats line up over and over and over again to say they wanted to strike down the state laws that prohibit the very worst criminals from being able to vote. And now today, we're not even talking about sending money to criminals. We're not even talking about letting criminals vote. We're talking about mass murderers and rapists. Do you let them out early? I guarantee you, every one of you, if you went home to your states, even in very blue states like Illinois, your constituents would be quite astonished that not a single Democrat on this committee is willing to say, let's not let mass murderers out early. That does not reflect moderation. In most prior Senates, there would have been some Democrats who say, well, okay, excluding murderers, excluding rapists, maybe that has some merit, let's find a middle ground. But post-Trump, today's Democrats don't do middle ground. That's unfortunate for criminal justice reform because, as I said, as a consequence of today's votes, we're getting ready to vote on this bill. It'll pass out of committee. You'll get all the Democrats, you'll get a couple of Republicans. And then, in all likelihood, it will never come up on the floor. If it comes up on the floor, it's not getting 60 votes. Doesn't have a prayer of getting 60 votes. First Step Act passed because for a brief moment, Senate Democrats were willing to find a middle ground and compromise, and in particular, accepted my amendments to exclude violent criminals. Unfortunately, that brief moment of reasonableness and common ground seems to have passed us. I think that is unfortunate for the Senate, and it's even more unfortunate for the country.
The senator from Texas reminds us of his view of the Democratic Party regularly. That's his right under the rules of the Senate and this committee. But I think if we reflect on what we are working on at this moment and have worked on in this committee, it defies his description. This bill, which he has condemned as some sort of a liberal trope, some departure of radical left Democrats, the bill has broad bipartisan support, including the American Conservative Union, Freedom Works, law enforcement leaders, Association of Prosecuting Attorneys Leadership Conference, and many more. The bill that we are extending and making retroactive was signed into law originally by Donald Trump. It was supported across the board by the Koch brothers, as I mentioned earlier, many conservative leaders, and the reason was basic. We believe that we can do a better job of making Americans safe by having a different standard when it comes to justice and incarceration. Senator Cruz disagrees. That is his right to disagree. But I think when we look at the evidence of the incarceration rates in the United States of America, at least the Senate Judiciary Committee not only has the right, has the responsibility to ask what is going on in America. Why are we filling the prisons more than any other country on earth? Are we that violent? Are we that criminal in our intent and our conduct to expect this to be normal? And are people in prison who frankly have been there too long or never should have been there? We know what's happened with videotapes and DNA. Innocence projects across America are finding people who are sitting on death row for decades were actually innocent, were wrongly prosecuted. Should we care? If you believe in justice, you should. What this bill has basically said was, we are giving some prisoners the right to petition for an opportunity for resentencing. Only an opportunity, no guarantee. And some of them don't have a ghost of a chance of ever seeing that happen. But for some, it will bring real justice. I want to be party to that. I'm ready to take the risk that others, like Senator Cruz, will criticize me for being soft on crime. That goes with the territory, I think, serving on the Senate Judiciary Committee. In the middle of this debate, to have the Council of Prison Locals, the correctional officers in BOP facilities informing us that they endorse our efforts to pass this law, These are the men and women who risk their lives every day in these prisons. They believe that what we're doing is reasonable. So at this point, at the urging of Senator Grassley, the clerk will call the roll on the passage of the bill.
Mr. Chairman.